New York Times apparently got access to these 4 questions, and so Emma and I are going to break down every single one. Now, I'm kidding. But there are some trends. And so what is your initial read from the release of these questions? Who do you think leaked them? What do you think the consequences of the leak will be?
Oh, it's got to be Trump's former lawyer, John Dowd, who leaked them to the press, because now Giuliani is the one who is handling Trump's legal affairs. He was replaced, this guy, John Dowd, last week by Rudy Giuliani, who, God, if I could think of someone I'd least want to be my lawyer, Rudy Giuliani would be up there with Kanye West at this point. Yeah, I think he's got to have leaked that to the press. I don't know what his motivations are, but Trump once again tweeted witch hunt this morning. So you know that these have clearly gotten to him. I would say that Michael Flynn is the central focus of these questions and the firing of Flynn. And a lot of it also centers around James Comey and those conversations. So clearly Mueller is taking the memos that Comey drew up quite seriously. And I'm also interested because some of the questions do center around some of Trump's public appearances. And I haven't really seen this reported in the media, but I'm curious how those will hold up in court, because a lot of times judges throw out public appearances and stuff said in the media because it wasn't said under oath. I guess it could just be a useful tool to inform the investigation more than it could be something legally, because we always talk about how Trump's obstructing justice and lying constantly in the public eye, but a lot of those aren't admissible in a court setting. So
yeah, it could be. I mean, the same thing, the public appearances, the tweets too. I don't know how official any particular judge would consider those, but it's possible that he's just expecting to ask Donald Trump the questions, knowing that this bumbling fool could respond in a way that's actually worse than what he originally said.
Yeah.
So you brought up that it was probably John Dowd that leaked them, and most people seem to believe that it was someone either on his legal team directly, or the New York Times is saying related to the legal team. But it's interesting because Donald Trump did tweet, "So disgraceful that the questions concerning the Russian witch hunt were leaked to the media," with leaked in quotation marks. I never know what that means. No questions on collusion. Oh, I see. You have a made-up phony crime, collusion, that never existed, and an investigation begun with illegally leaked classified information. Nice.
Nice.
So much there. But he's mad that they're leaked. He thinks it's disgraceful, even though it looks like it was probably a member of his team.
Yeah, it does. And I'm going to name my firstborn child Collusion, because he keeps capitalizing it.
Yeah.
That is not like a proper noun, so stop doing it. Yeah, I mean, it's got to be someone on his team. Everyone leaks like a sieve in the Trump administration, because they know that, or in the Trump team, I guess, even the legal team, because they know that the ship is going down and they want to position themselves better by putting the information that they want out there to the press. So it's not just the Trump administration and people within the White House like Kellyanne Conway that are leaking information. It's clearly people on the legal team or on the former legal team. So who knows if it was Dowd, but I don't really see who else benefits than the guy who was immediately fired and replaced by the clown Rudy Giuliani.
Yeah, there have been instances in which I could come up with an explanation as to why someone on Mueller's team might have leaked something, but I don't understand the advantage here. I think they just want to get his answers to these questions. And I don't think that leaking them makes the meeting more likely necessarily, so that would be an odd strategy. But a couple things. One, Trump doesn't seem to know what leaking really is, or who's leaking. He seems oblivious to the fact that his team is doing it. He doesn't know what collusion is. He doesn't understand why the investigation began. Also, he tweeted this: "It would seem very hard to obstruct justice for a crime that never happened. Witch hunt." So he also doesn't seem to understand law, because you can entirely obstruct justice for a crime that never happened. He doesn't have to obstruct like the criminal. He's obstructing the Department of Justice in their investigation. And so we're going to talk about a few of the questions that were asked and figure out what they might, what sort of we can expect coming out of Mueller's investigation as a result of them. But one thing that was clear to me, there's a lot about Flynn, as you said, there's a lot about Comey, but there are also certainly questions that seem to be getting into the area of collusion, which he denies were asked. I mean, one, during a 2013 trip to Russia, what communication and relationships did you have with the Agalarovs and Russian government officials? I mean, we know exactly what that's referencing. Theoretically, if there was some sort of collusion, that could be tied up in it.
Yeah, there's definitely questions about collusion. And also, when you could talk about collusion, it seems like Michael Flynn is at the center of it, meetings that he has had, and that would be what the obstruction of justice would be about. So a lot of these questions center around the call that Michael Flynn made to Sergei Kislyak, who's now been the most infamous Russian name in the United States recently, in December 2016, which was when the transition was going on. And then his reaction after that, before he was even president as well. So I do think that there's collusion, but I mean, I'll ask you this, John. Where do you think that these questions lead to in terms of his financial crimes? Because I think a lot of us have always said that that's where this is going to be leading.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the closest possible connection is, I mean, there are some references to Paul Manafort in an area that we previously hadn't necessarily known. I mean, certainly financial, they talk about the possibility of him having discussed sanctions, which isn't necessarily directly his finances, but obviously has financial implications. It might be that he believes that something during that 2013 trip had something to do with his finances. I would say that the questions seem a little bit light on that particular topic. I didn't see a ton that seems to directly tie into that. But just to put, not to put too fine a point on it for the people watching at home, Donald Trump's strategy seems to be at all times to not only deny that collusion happened, but to deny that anyone thinks it happened, that none of these investigatory bodies, Mueller doesn't think it happened, they've all cleared him, all of that. And so right now he's saying there are no questions about collusion to sort of, I think he wants to have his supporters be blindsided when something comes out, for it to seem bizarre after hearing repeatedly that nothing was going on. So really fast, I just want to read, there's a couple more. They're clearly about collusion. During the campaign, what did you know about Russian hacking, use of social media, or other acts aimed at the campaign? What discussions did you have during the campaign regarding Russian sanctions? What involvement did you have concerning platform changes regarding arming Ukraine? I mean, several of those are at least one side of a potential quid pro quo between him and the Russians.
And they specifically ask about if they discussed whether the campaign should or should not meet with Vladimir Putin himself. So that's a specific question. I mean, that's as close to collusion as it can get. I feel like the financial crimes are probably easier to prove, but it seems like Mueller has a lot of information about collusion, which I didn't even really see coming. These questions are pretty pointed.
Before we move on to what I think is the easiest to prove charge, I want to go over just a couple more questions. One we referred to, what knowledge did you have of any outreach by your campaign, including by Paul Manafort, to Russia about potential assistance to the campaign? I thought that was interesting because I previously hadn't seen any allegations that Paul Manafort specifically had been engaged in anything outside of stuff to benefit himself. So it might be that Robert Mueller has information we don't have. He also asked, what did you know about communication between Roger Stone, his associates, Julian Assange, or WikiLeaks?
Yes, and it's also notable that Roger Stone and Paul Manafort have long been connected. They started one of the first lobbying firms, the swampiest thing you could possibly do. It's Manafort, Black and Stone, or Black, Manafort, and Stone, missing I think Stone was last, though. I'm sure he'd appreciate that. But they've long been in cahoots in terms of cozying up to right-wing dictators and doing their lobbying in Washington. They were infamous for that in the 70s and the 80s. And now Paul Manafort was the chairman of Donald Trump's campaign, potentially cozying up to Vladimir Putin, another right-wing dictator, and Roger Stone was his hatchet man in the media. So it all comes full circle, and I find it very interesting that they are included in these questions that were leaked.
Yeah, and I have to say, I've thought every once in a while about coming up with a top 10 list of the people in the administration I would most like to see go down over this, mostly for personal reasons. But Roger Stone has got to be in a very high spot in that list. Now,
yes, and sorry.
Oh no, what were you gonna say?
Well, I was going to say they also included the emails that Don Jr. released to the public in the name of full transparency, which also included communications with Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. So there seems to be something there, even though some progressives, I would even say, were going off about how you can't go after Julian Assange, you can't go after WikiLeaks, when, I think there's a clear difference between what someone like Edward Snowden did and what someone like Julian Assange has done, releasing information with zero redactions and also clearly had a political motivation.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we can admire past efforts, but we can also acknowledge what seems to be a clear multi-year campaign to assist one particular political party. And that doesn't mean that anything illegal was done. I mean, that's what the investigation is for, is to find out about that. Simply communicating with Don Jr., I might find that objectionable and bizarre, but it's certainly not illegal from what I know. But the one thing I do want to talk about, though, is while you have the financial crimes, you have the loose collusion, which means a lot of specific things. It's referred to by that one term. The thing that I think is easiest to prove, and I don't understand why we're still having this conversation, is obstruction of justice. I mean, he said that he fired Comey to get the Russia thing off of him. He was clearly trying to protect Michael Flynn. I mean, this is classic obstruction of justice. Many of the questions that were submitted involve that. So if we could bring this up, there's references to him telling the Russian diplomats in May of last year that firing Mr. Comey had taken the pressure off. There was a reference to his interview with Lester Holt, perhaps one of the most consequential interviews that was conducted last year. And then there's also this. I thought this is very interesting. What discussions did you have regarding terminating the special counsel, and what did you do when that consideration was reported in January 2018? So multiple layers of potential obstruction of justice there. I mean, what do you think about, I know that you said that you think that the financial crimes really lie at the heart of that, but what do you think about the strategy of going after him for the cover-up rather than the crime, or in addition to the crime?
I think it must be an addition. It's hard for me to say because I'm clearly not on the inside of it. But I was of the ilk who said that it was going to be financial crimes. But now I am saying, just to clarify, it seems like collusion is going to be some of the charges leveled against or the heart of the investigation, and obstruction of justice. And again, I was surprised that there were specific inclusions of interview snippets in these questions, because again, I don't know how admissible it is, but it seems like a larger strategy of trying to get him to admit something on the record, even if the interview itself wouldn't be admissible in court. So if they were to ask him specifically about the Lester Holt interview, he would have to answer a question about his answer, if that makes sense. And his answer was incoherent and completely different than what the reasoning that they gave to the public about why they fired James Comey, which was because they felt so badly for poor Hillary Clinton. I know he'd been so kind to her this whole process, and decided to just continue to show her the humanity that he displays on a daily basis. So that's why he decided to fire James Comey. It's obvious. It is so obvious. It just depends on the case that can be built. Can you prove it without beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law, which is much different than the court of public opinion, even though the court of public opinion is probably right in this case. So that just means stacking as much evidence as possible and potentially getting Trump to perjure himself.
Yeah, I think that you're 100% right. I think that they need to get him to say again the things he's previously said in an official context. And if they can sit him down, there is almost no one in this country less mentally or emotionally equipped to deal with that investigation than Donald Trump.